Hi there, Ronnie, Amber's Night, coming at you with another overview. I've done numbers 1 to 4 in my top 5 RPGs, and I'm just going to finish the set now with number 5, which is Palladium, the role-playing game. I think this is the second edition, revised edition, which it is. Why do I like Palladium as opposed to something like AD&D? There's very little to choose between them, if I'm completely honest. But it's the little differences. I think also because I actually played it first. Up until I first played Palladium, this back in '87. Until then, I had never played any other role-playing game other than basic D&D and the occasional Dragon Warriors. And then my friend Ralph bought Palladium. And my whole view of fantasy games changed. It was the first time that I had seen a system, because I hadn't seen AD&D, because I hadn't seen Rollmaster. And I had only just started playing Middle-earth role-playing map. It was the first time I'd seen a system where you picked race, then profession. And the races, there are 15 races in this book. I'll give you the list of the races you can play. Human, elf, dwarf, goblin, hobgoblin, kobold, orc, ogre, troll, troglodyte, changeling, gnome, and wolfen. It's an incredible list. It's something like 14 or 15 classes. There's 10 stats, 9 stats, IQ, mental endurance, mental affinities, physical strength, physical prowess, physical endurance, physical beauty, and speed. I mean, you can tell from that AD&D, yeah, right. And you create your character. There are certain professions, they call them professions rather than classes in this. There are certain professions that are barred to certain races. Some are better than others. Humans, understandably, can pretty much pick anyone. They have no restrictions, neither do the elves, neither do the changelings, neither do the ogres, strangely, and neither do the wolfen, who are just big, bipedal lemon wolves. One of the things I did like about this, I mean, it gives you plenty of optional rules to flesh out your character with backgrounds and so on. The occupational character classes, the professions, are mercenary, fighter, soldier, knight, paladin, longbowman, ranger, thief, assassin. The men of magic are wizard, witch, warlock, diabolist, summoner, mind mage, and alchemist. You've got clergy, which is priest or priestess, druid, shaman, or healer. There are certain stat restrictions. You have to have certain stat minimums. In some cases, you have to have certain alignments. And alignments are one of the fun things about this, because this game has no neutral. There are 7 alignments. They come under 3 general headings, which is good, evil, and selfish. No neutrals, and it goes into a nice little paragraph as to why it doesn't like neutrals. And it's a very good paragraph, essentially saying that you just couldn't be neutral. You can't make any action or do anything without either doing something good, evil, or something for your own self. So any action you take is good, evil, or selfish. So that's why it pins him that way. Combat is fairly simple. Roll a die. There's an armor rating. Try and reach that or over. Damage is fairly lethal. I mean, there are weapons here that will quite happily do 4d6 damage, which, if you think about the fact that this is an old school game, it's a fairly brutal system. You don't walk into combat lightly in this game without some expectation that you might get back out of it. If I have one negative, and I mentioned this in my top 5 video, if I have one negative about the character creation is, well, 2 actually. 1, there's no character sheet, which is an unforgivable oversight. They eventually put one into the Adventures in the High Seas supplement, but it's an egregious oversight not to have one in the game. Also, the layout for the characters, for character creation, is all over the place. I eventually actually put together a list to actually do it properly, so I'd know which pages to go to, which I think is fine. I think that's perfectly fine to do, but it shouldn't have been that way. It should have been better laid out. Having said that, it's not as if it's completely unnegotiable. You can get through it. You can create a character. I happen to have a wolf and paladin called Kragar Garona in my Palladium days, which I enjoyed. The other thing I really liked about this was, for me, set it apart from a lot of the other games going on, is that it was very much made for older players. This wasn't your typical, hey, high fantasy game. It was very mature. There was a constant streak of racial prejudice and mistrust against different races. It was dealing with grown-up themes. The world was wonderfully well imagined. There's not there are a lot of creatures that I would say are your typical fantasy tropes. Unicorns and chimeras, a lot of stuff that come from myth and legend, and an awful lot that seems to be derived from various legends from around the world, things like Celtic mythology, because there's a lovely piece on fairies, and other religions and folk tales from around the world, which I liked. It gave Palladium a unique flavour rather than just simply going for the D&D trope. The dragon section is beautiful on its own. The pencil shading art, there's a lot of people that don't like pencil shade art, and I get that. I'm just going to find the one dragon in here which just works for me. This is the bugger of all dragons. This is known as the Great Horned Dragon, and as you can see, he's really not to be messed with. In closing, I think this is a great game. Yes, it's old school. Yes, you're going to be spending an awful lot of time head scratching and coming up with rules on the fly. Having said that, for an old school game, I think it's the best. I think it's better than D&D. Yes, there's my controversial route for the day. I think it's better than AD&D. I really do. I always have liked it. I always have preferred it to AD&D. I don't think that you can do, you know, I don't think there's anything wrong in owning this particular game. And the fact that it's 274 pages, this particular edition, and to be honest, it is the only book you need. I mean, you might want to grab the Monsters and Animals book just to give you a few more creatures to kick about, but it really is the only book you need. And these days you can find the character sheets online, so that's not so bad. You can print them off quite happily. If you find it second hand, because obviously it's out of print, this version's out of print, if you find it, buy it, especially if it's really low price. I think you would actually enjoy it. I put it ahead of basic D&D simply because of its scope and the fact that you can do multi-classic. And I put it ahead of MERP simply because MERP is good, but there's a lot of games that are better. I think this one is the best. The only classic fantasy game that I put ahead of this is Pendragon, which is my number 4. And the only other fantasy game which goes above them is Castle Falkenstein, which remains my number 1. But this is my number 5. I love it. I think it's really good. And if you get a chance, give it the time. I think you might be pleasantly surprised.